Hi, I'm going to go ahead and present on my two rotation station handouts. So, of course, my topic was adoptive families, and on the first handout, I pretty much just provided like some differences in terminology as far as adoption goes. So I provided adoption, adopted, and adoptive. So adopt is to take by choice into a relationship, especially to take voluntary as one's own child. Adoption is the act or process of adopting a child. Adopted is it refers to a child or adult who has legally become part of a family other than biological parents, and an adoptive is made or acquired by adoption. It's also a term that helps distinguish between parents who have chosen to adopt and raise a child. So I found that a little bit interesting. That's something that I really didn't know prior to doing my research. And then I went on ahead and researched the history of adoption. So pretty much in earlier times, adoption in the late 19th century, it was only viewed as primarily the meeting of needs for adults and for like societal needs. So during this time, children were only adopted for like inheritance lines, like expanding the inheritance lines, religious purposes, and for like additional labor for families. So like children working on farms and like working on railroads and stuff like that. And also during this time, children in the 1850s, they were adopted they were only adopted between relatives, or they were only adopted between like step parents, and they were also transferred without like legal recognition. So there were like no papers, being signed, or like no legal action being taken. And then in 1851, the state of Massachusetts passed the first adoption statute. So this pretty much set forth the conditions for adopting a child, like legally. And from that, like many other states in the U.S., they pretty much went ahead and followed their lead, and this provided like a form of like judicial supervision regarding adoption, throughout the country. And so then I went ahead and researched some current trends in adoption. Throughout all of them that I found, I pretty much found the one that described how white American infants were the only children who were available for adoption in the earlier times. And then after the 1960s, changes in like social and sexual contacts gave a rise to the acceptance of like single parenthood and unmarried women to just pretty much decide to keep their children. And so if white Americans decided to keep their children, then there were less white American infants available for adoption. And so, and then also, I forgot to mention that during this time, the legalization of abortion, and the availability of like contraceptives were available too. So that also played a part into why like there was a decrease in white American infants being available for adoption at birth. And then, with the respect of less white American infants being available for adoption, the remaining, or like many potential adoptive parents started to turn to other options as far as adoption goes. So like they started to adopt children who were Black, who were Hispanic, who were multiracial, and they also adopted children who were out of the country. So I found that pretty much very interesting. And then the overview of like systemic and cultural factors in adoptive families is that one of them is adoptive children are often overrepresented in inpatient and outpatient hospitals or like health settings. And then adoptive children are placed at a higher risk of academic progress in school. They're assessed with like learning disabilities, and they're most likely classified to have neurological impairment, um, perception impairment, and emotional disturbance. And then differences in like adoptive children and non-adoptive children is that there are problems seen in areas such as temperament, mother-infant attachment, mental and motor functioning, and communication development. And then another thing that I found was that for adoptive parents, um, they were more likely to put their children in counseling rather than non-adoptive parents. So, you can imagine how that those factors causes more oppression on this particular population. And then one of the most interesting early interventions that I found for this population was that for adoptive parents adopting their child initially, especially like for infants and like toddlers and stuff like that, they have to pay a lot of attention to their early attachment. So like they have to respond like rapidly if the child needs anything, like they need their diaper change, they need a bottle or anything like that. They have to pretty much secure that attachment. And then also self-regulation is highly recommended. So like adoptive parents who are like, I guess, more so in tune with like their negative emotions, there needs to be some self-regulation as far as that goes with projecting it on their children, especially like their adopted children, especially with like children who are coming straight out of like foster care, and there was like some problems with fighting and their negative emotions as well. So just that differentiation and awareness of what are they projecting on a child that can potentially cause further harm. And so that pretty much wraps up my first handout. And then for my second handout, I decided to focus on an adoptive family that involves the biological mother, the two adoptive parents, and then the actual child. So the adoptive mother name is Kyla. She's a 30-year-old African-American female. She currently works as a housekeeper and is a recovering cocaine addict. Her sexual orientation is heterosexual, and she identifies as single. She has minimum education history and belongs to the lower class SES. She's the biological mother of the one son. And then the two adoptive parents were Margaret and Charles Lewing. Margaret is a 39-year-old white American female. She works as a social worker and identifies as heterosexual. She belongs to middle-class SES, biological mother of one teenage daughter besides the adoptive son. And then Charles is a 41-year-old white American male. He identifies as heterosexual and is married to Margaret, belongs to middle-class SES, and the biological father of their one teenage daughter. And so, also Isaiah, he's a 4-year-old African-American male. He was adopted at birth by Margaret, and he is currently a Head Start student. So, my presenting problem was that Kyla, Margaret, and Isaiah appeared in family therapy regarding custody concerns for Isaiah. Isaiah was abandoned at birth by his biological mother, Kyla, who was previously addicted to cocaine. At the time of abandonment, Kyla was departing from a drug house and experiencing distorted thoughts. Isaiah was left in a dumpster, later found by authorities and taken to a nearby hospital. The next morning, Kyla realized Isaiah had been abandoned and later returned to find him. At the hospital, Isaiah was discovered by Margaret, a social worker. Due to several health complications, doctors were convinced Isaiah would not live. Margaret becomes convinced to take over the care of Isaiah and eventually adopts him into her family. During this time, Isaiah's biological mother is unaware of his existence but later discovers that he is still alive. She has become clean of substance abuse, completed drug rehabilitation, and earned a job as a housekeeper. While under the Lewins' care, Isaiah is difficult and hyperactive, but is still genuinely loved by the Lewins family. After discovering Isaiah's existence and location, Kyla decides to fight for custody. And so for my treatment plan, I pretty much, I decided to, and I don't know, like, if this is a bad thing or anything like that, but, you guys can give me feedback. But I pretty much decided to go with trauma-focused CBT for my treatment plan. The reason being is because I believe that the focus, although the biological mother and one of the adoptive parents appeared in therapy, I believe that the focus was more so on the child, primarily at least. So like the child first, and then the parents needs second. So, and then with the fact that Isaiah, he's difficult and hyperactive in his adoptive household. I felt like there might have been some trauma there that he's experiencing, although he's only 4. But being that he's African American and then he's seeing white parents, he may have some knowledge or some, emotional connection as far as that goes. So I decided to, do some trauma-based focus. And so my treatment plan, and also with the respect of Isaiah's biological mother, being a recovering drug addict, I thought that there needed to be some trauma focus there as well. That they pretty much can, all connect with and all relate to. And then for the adoptive mother, her just seeing Isaiah being left and, pretty much being in the hospital, potentially, ready to die, there could be some trauma experience with that too, especially since they're at the point of fighting for custody as far as, he goes. So that's the reason why I chose to do that over like emotion therapy and stuff like that. So for my treatment plan, my first phase was called engagement. So during this phase, I planned to engage the family and, establish the rapport. That's the goal. And then my objective was to identify how treatment progress will be determined, and then discuss beliefs about therapy. And then my interventions were, a direct discussion of perceptual barriers, including prior negative experiences with mental health treatment and lack of confidence in treatment effectiveness, identification of each of the caregivers' greatest concern about the child, and then possibly conduct clinical interviewing with the child and the caregivers. So like I said before, during this stage, I would pretty much, get everyone to engage, maybe explain, what is your view of, what's the situation for the biological mother and the adoptive mother, and then also that would open up some more of a understanding and maybe potential areas of I guess like trust for them, as far as the biological mother comes in and she doesn't really know who, how did she get her son, how did he end up with a white, how did he end up with a white woman, how all this happened. And then maybe on the other end for the adoptive mother, she probably looks at the biological mother as, well, you abandoned your child. How did you end up forgetting to, how did you end up putting your child in a dumpster, stuff like that. So there's a lot of barriers as far as that goes. So just getting them to engage and just, share their both sides of the story or both perspectives would maybe, cancel out some negative feelings and get them to, expose the more positive ones. And then, of course, establishing rapport with me as a therapist, because, I don't know if they've ever been in therapy, and I would want them to understand that, regardless of if they came to therapy for their own personal reasons or if they came to therapy for, a court order reason, that I'm here to help. And that's the goal. And so then in my second stage, I labeled it parenting. And so the goal in this stage is to improve the relationship between both caregivers and child, and then teach or reinforce use of skills. So the objectives would be to apply positive parenting. So examples of praise, selective attention, ignoring rewards, etc. And then identify concerns or problem behaviors in the child. And then for interventions, I would establish special playtime, and then maybe assign some readings on functional behavior, like examples. Get them to become educated on what functional behavior is versus what's not very functional within households. And pretty much during this stage, I would want to take the focus off of, okay, we're here in therapy to determine who's right or who really gets the custody. Like, I would pretty much eliminate the court idea of things, if that makes sense. So, if, for example, I would get them to understand that we're here for the child, like regardless of who gets custody. The ultimate goal is to make sure that this child is well functioned and will, grow up to be, not in any like further harm. And so then in the third stage, I named it safety. And so the goal during this stage would be enhancing future safety and enhanced development. My objectives would be teach safety skills for use in risky situations that may rise in the future, and then identify risk triggers, warning signs. And then intervention would be role play and make a formal written safety plan. So during this stage, I would pretty much deal with the aftermath of things like that go on in court. So, for example, if the child does get placed with either of the parents, I want the parents to be able to deal with that, that backlash. For example, like, if, let's say, the biological mother was to lose custody of or actually remain in loss of custody of her child, she may blame herself and, choose to take her life, take someone else's life. So I wanted to practice, safety plans if this was to ever come about, and vice versa for the adoptive parent as well, because there has already been some sort of attachment placed between the child and the adoptive parent. So if she was to lose him, she may, feel like she's the loser, and negative emotions and feelings will come about. So I just wanted to, play some attention or pay some attention to that as far as, what will happen. Because at this point, we don't really know. So that is that. And my synthesis is pretty much a summary of what I just said. So, just, I would like some feedback as far as that go. Like, is that a good way to look at things in this type of situation? So feel free to let me know, and thank you for listening and taking the time out to view this video.